How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another edition of the athleteshubpod podcast. So it looks like Michael Carrick's going to become the new permanent head coach of Manchester United. There's been a lot of news and rumours, speculation circulating in the last couple of hours, or 24 hours, I should say, saying that talks between him and the club are progressing, and he is likely to become the new head coach on a permanent basis. And I think since he's taken over, there's always been that question as to whether Carrick should be given the job on a full-time basis. I actually did an episode a few months ago looking at potentially the pros and cons, I guess, of hiring Carrick on a permanent basis, whether it would be too soon for him, whether he was the right choice. But it seems as if he's going to be given that honour of becoming the new head coach on a permanent basis at the club. And I guess when you look at Carrick's tenure, sort of taken over as interim head coach, right? I guess you look at the results, look at the majority of performances. It's very hard, I guess, to argue on the basis of that he shouldn't be given the job, because particularly when he first come in, getting the wins against City and Arsenal particularly, and obviously he's beating Chelsea away, he's beating Liverpool at home. Look at the games that are considered big fixtures, right? He's won those games. Some of the other performances on other games, the results have gone well, but the performances have been questionable. But you look at his record and you look at what he's achieved with this group of players so far, right? It's difficult to argue against him getting the job. Of course, there's always a question: is there better options out there? And if there is, the club pursue that rather than go with Carrick. But at the moment, if he was to be given a job full time, for me personally, I don't see. I wouldn't be against it, to be honest. But at the same time, we've seen it in a way before. We've only got a Solskjaer and what happened there towards the end. So there's always going to be a bit of, I guess, a bit of worry there and a bit of anxiety from that perspective. But I think right now, it looks like he's going to be the head coach, and I think it would be good to kind of look at specific things that I think he has to fix when he becomes a permanent head coach. And for over the last 3-4 years, there's been a lot of bad decisions, whether that be by managers who are making signings, whether it's the club making decisions. And I think entering this new phase now, I don't think the club can afford to make those same bad decisions again. And I think Carrick, if he's going to be given the title of head coach or manager, then I think he has to play a crucial part in terms of getting this club stable first and foremost, but also seeing it progress as time goes on as well. So I just want to look at a few things that he has to fix when he becomes permanent head coach. And a lot of these points also need immediate attention, as well, I've got to say. And I think the first point is looking at Marcus Rashford. Now, we know that Marcus Rashford at the moment is at Barcelona, completing his loan spell there. He's had a great season, 14 goals, 14 assists. He's had a terrific time in Spain, to be honest. And he's even come out publicly and said that he would rather stay in Barcelona. He wants to stay at Barcelona. I think there's been a bit of back and forth in terms of the club not being sure whether to sort of activate the buy-on clause, which I believe is £26 million, and whether that could see him potentially return to Manchester United after his loan spell there. But I think it's clear that he wants to stay at Barcelona, and I guess maybe fans and people at the club might say, well, this is a good time to maybe part ways with Marcus Rashford. But if we look at the worst case scenario and he was to come back to Manchester United, the question is, would he fit into a Carrick team? And I think he would. Now, this is just me talking from the basis of a worst case scenario that he doesn't, the Barcelona don't activate that buyout clause and he has to come back to Manchester. I think he would thrive in the Michael Carrick team, because if you look at the Carrick team, the way it's built, the way it's set up, just like it was underneath Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, there's similarities there. It's a team really that was built to contain pressure and utilise the attacking threat, particularly the pace. At the time, it was Dan James, it was, Anthony Martial, Mason Greenwood. And you look at now, the likes of Mbeumo, Ahmad, Cunha, Šeško, there's an attacking line there that is really threatening in terms of its pace, and Rashford almost fits perfectly into that particular profile of attacker for Carrick. So I think he would be a good fit if he was to come back. And again, this is a worst case scenario. If he was to come back to Man United and have to start there again, I think it would be an asset to the club. And he's done that before. Again, we know what a good player he is. There's a debate as to whether he's world class or not, but Rashford is a very good player, and you've seen when he's at his very best, like, he's hard to live with, and he's a decent player. Again, an international player as well, representing England at the World Cup and at Euros as well. So this is a player who's been at the club before. Clearly, Ruben Amorim didn't like Marcus Rashford didn't fancy him at all for whatever reason. But he's gone to Barcelona. He's proven that he's still a very good player. But there's still a question mark as to whether his future lies with Barcelona or elsewhere, or whether he's got to come back to Man United again. So I think that's something that Carrick and the club have got to address quite quickly, because again, there is a World Cup this summer, and I don't think it's ideal that Carrick hasn't got that summer of pre-season or that time, because the players will obviously be away at international duty at the World Cup, so he won't have that amount of time to really work with the players and as much as he would like. So I think this has to be an issue that they do address quite quickly. Whether Barcelona activate that buyer's clause and he signs there permanently, or he comes back to United, they organise maybe another loan deal perhaps, and Barcelona cover a bit of the wages, or whether he goes elsewhere or he stays at United. I think that's got to be decided. But again, speaking from perspective of, if he was to come back to the club, would he fit into Carrick's system? Yes, because of the profile he's got. He's been at the United before. Carrick knows him very well after obviously working with him with Solskjaer. So, I think he'll probably fit into that system quite well, to be fair. But it's just me speaking in terms of whether the worst case scenario happens and he has to come back to United. But I don't know what you guys think, though. Would it be a worst case scenario to have Rashford back? A lot of people said he's got to move on, but look at what he's done in Barcelona. Like, if you're honest, would you have Marcus Rashford back at the football club? I think the second thing Carrick has got to fix is the midfield. Now, we know that Casemiro will be leaving in the summer. He's announced it. And he's going to be a huge miss. And I think United Bruno's been fantastic for the last 6 years since joining Man United. He's obviously more of an attacking player. But I think with Casemiro leaving, it's highlighted the hole in midfield. And I think Man United for years probably have lacked a real dominant midfield player. There's been the likes of Pogba's come in there. I think there was Matic there at one point. But United for a number of years have not had a dominant midfielder, probably since Michael Carrick himself, to be honest. Like a midfielder who plays week in, week out. You know what you're going to get from him. He's great on the ball, tactically aware. His in-game intelligence is right up there as well. I think United are missing that midfielder. And it shows you that, when Casemiro is not playing, what the team misses. And particularly against Sunderland as well. When Carrick changed the team around and Casemiro didn't play, you saw, how poor the team played, how dysfunctional the team was. And I think that highlights the need for a real top midfielder to come in there and really fill that void. Of course, you've still got Mainu in there. You've still got Bruno, who's going to play as attacking. Cunha is still an attacking midfielder. But I think the club needs someone who's going to be really dominant and box to box. Someone who's going to, dominate that midfield, to be fair. And I think the club have lacked that, to be honest. And the three names that have come up regularly linked with Man United are Tonali, who's at Newcastle, obviously Elliot Anderson, and Tchouaméni, who's at Real Madrid. I think Tonali is fantastic. I've watched him at Newcastle. I think he really is what the club will need. I think, like I mentioned before, United have got midfielders in there who are good at certain aspects of the game, in terms of whether it's Bruno's attacking, whether it's Mainu's flair and his ability to intercept play and to drift with the ball and to carry the ball. But at the same time, I think you need someone in there who's good at breaking up play, who can intercept, who is essentially box to box. And I've watched Tonali. I think Casemiro is similar to Tonali, because Casemiro can get box to box and he's always in the right place at the right time. That's because he's got fantastic in-game intelligence. But Tonali is everywhere. He's almost 100 miles an hour. He gets into tackles. He's 1 minute he's defending the edge of his box, next minute he's at the edge of the opposition's box, trying to score a goal. Like, he's everywhere. And I think the club needs somebody like that. Someone like a Kante mode who can do all the dirty work and allows the likes of Mainu and Bruno to really do work their magic and do what they're good at. So I think Tonali, for me personally, would be my number one choice, because he already plays in the Premier League, and I think he's what the club needs. He's 26 years of age. So I think he could be a perfect fit for the club. Obviously, you look at Tchouaméni's situation at Real Madrid with Valverde. You're probably thinking there, is he going to stay at Real Madrid? Again, things are not rosy there. And again, it depends who the manager's going to be. If Jose Mourinho is going to come back to Real Madrid and really get that dressing room together, then you might see Tchouaméni stay at Real Madrid. But with the situation with Valverde, you're just thinking, apparently the club said that he can leave as well. So that could potentially be one to keep an eye on. But you look at Elliot Anderson, who's been fantastic at Forest as well, and again, he's most likely going to make the England squad for this summer's World Cup. No, he's been fantastic for Forest. No, real intelligent player. No, really good on the ball, creates chances, scores a goal as well. And I think with Tonali and Addison, they play in the Premier League, so they a lot more familiar with the league. They're a lot more familiar with the surroundings, so there won't be necessarily a bedding in period there. Whereas with Chouameni, if he was to come in from Real Madrid, then there might be a bit of a bedding in period. We saw Pogba when he came back from Juventus, fantastic player, but it just didn't work out for him at United for various reasons. But I think with Tonali, he's probably going to be my number one choice. And of course, we've heard Adam Wharton being linked to Man United as well. But I think with Tonali, he's essentially perfect. Like, he's really good midfielder, and he'd be what the club needs right now, to be honest. So I'd probably go with him. And it's important that the signings are correct. And I think one thing I'd probably give Amorim praise for is that he made really good signings. Lamens has been fantastic since joining. Cunha has been great, and Bumo's been fantastic as well. Sesko's obviously been very good for United and is contributing in vital moments. So the signings, I think, this summer from Carrick and the club have to be the right signings, because they can't afford to have continuous transfer windows where signings are hit and miss. There needs to be the right profiles, the right characters, the right type of players that are signed. So I feel as if particularly Tonali, Anderson probably would be high on the club's list. I think Chouameni, again, that just depends on the situation of Real Madrid and whether he'd want to come to the Premier League, specifically United. But I think those three in the midfield is an area which has to be addressed this summer, to be honest. So that's definitely something that Carrick has got to fix. Not just a midfield, but again, just generally transfers have to be on point for United this summer, because they can't afford to keep having hit and miss transfers, bringing in players on high wages and struggling to sell them on. That's been an issue for a number of years, and that can't keep happening. So this summer's a really big summer for United. I think they tried to convince Casemiro to stay for another year, but he's made his mind up. So I think it's definitely time the club start to definitely put their hands in their pockets and go out for a top midfielder, a young midfielder who can be the heart of the club's midfield for a long time. I think Mainu, again, he's still young. He's going to be part of that midfield for a long time. But we need someone else in there who can also accommodate him and also create, a real, whether it's a triangle, whether it's a free midfield, a two midfield with Bruno's attacking. If he stays, then the club have got to find the right person. I think if the midfield signing is correct, I think that's a huge bonus, and I think that will then be the basis to then build the rest of the team around that midfielder or those specific midfielders. Now, another thing that he's got to fix again is obviously talking about transfers in. You've got to look at the players who I think have to leave this summer as well. These three I've highlighted because Joshua Zirkzee, Mason Mount, obviously Emmanuel Ugarte. I think it's clear, like I mentioned, the Sunderland game on the weekend. It showed when Carrick changes the team around and he put certain players in it, it's just not the same. Now, I think Mason Mount, first and foremost, I think he's a very good player. We saw him at Chelsea. We saw what he could do. We saw, how great of a second midfielder he was. He just had too many injuries since joining Man United, and he's not been able to really get going. Of course, he signed under Ten Hag. He was sacked. Amorim came in. There were little spells, but again, he was injured for the large parts of that as well. And he hasn't really been able to get going at the football club. And I feel like I think what Carrick needs next season, because we've spoken about the increase in the competitions, right? He's got 4 competitions, and he needs a squad that he can rely upon. And if you're continuously injured and you can't make up minutes and you're not available, you're not reliable, and therefore you're not useful. And the club are paying up these players a lot of money to be on a wage book, and they're not contributing. And he needs to get off to the best start possible, also have a steady or stable tenure, at least for a year or so. He needs to have players who he can rely on week in, week out. And as much as Mason Mount tries very hard and is a very good player, it feels as if it's not working out right now for him. And therefore, this summer might be a good chance for the club to maybe try and move him on. Look at Joshua Zirkzee, who I don't think is good enough at all. You look at the likes of Sesko, Cunha, and Bumo. Those players are aggressive. They're quick. They're quick to the ball. They make runs. They're at it. You look at Zirkzee. He's almost the polar opposite. Most of the time he looks disengaged. I don't think he's what United need. I don't think he's good enough. We saw that against Sunderland. We've seen that countless times this season when he has played. It's just not the same up there. And with Ugarte as well, again, I don't think he's a bad player, but it just hasn't worked out for him at United. You look at him, Casemiro is essentially chalk and cheese, really. So he might be another one that the club have got to move on. So there's a lot of players I think you've got to mention as well. Anthony, Højlund, again, spoke about Rashford before. But the club have got to make decisions on players who they believe are not going to be part of the future. Because what Carrick needs, he needs someone who he can rely upon. He needs someone who, or players who, you can get the best out of. And again, Luke Shaw might be in that category as well. I love Luke Shaw. But at the same time, he's not always available. And as a manager, if your players aren't available, then it just makes your life a lot harder, especially when there's a lot of competitions to play for. So as much as the transfers into the club have to be on point, I think the club have really now got to get rid of certain players. They've got to, really, get rid of people who aren't going to be part of the club's future. And I think going forward as well, when signing players, the right profile has to be, that has to be the priority. And a lot of these players, again, probably are good players, but Højlund's gone on to do things at Napoli. Obviously, Anthony went on to Betis to do really good things, but at United it just hasn't worked out. And I think the profile player has to be key for the club going forward now. And again, that comes down to the injury record as well. That has to be key because again, if you're signing players on higher wages and they're not playing, then you're not used to anyone, to be honest. So transfers for Carrick have to be a real priority this summer. And that's just not the incomings, but also the outgoings are just as essential, to be honest. And I think the last thing as well is, I mentioned Manu a week or so back after he signed his new contract. And I've also mentioned him today about how important he is for the club's future in that midfield. Again, he's still so young. He's 21 years old. As much as Carrick has got the best out of him after the nightmare with Amorim, Manu's got a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of progression in there. There's still a lot to achieve in his career. And I think he needs the right manager to be able to bring the best out of him. And if that's going to be Michael Carrick, I think that's a good thing because, again, Carrick's been at the club before and, he's obviously worked with different players at different levels and not just as a coach, but also as a player. You'd have seen players come through the academy into the first team. I think, one thing he's definitely got to look at probably going forward is trying to integrate the academy again because probably in the last couple of years, I think United probably focused more on bringing players in from abroad, players on big contracts, superstar players, as they call them. But one thing I'd probably give Lou Van Gaal credit for at the time was how much he put faith into the youth of Man United and looking at the academy, bringing through certain players. Of course, Mason Greenwood came through under Solskjaer as well. I know Mourinho looked at McTominay. And I think managers have to Carrick probably has to maybe go back to that again because as much as we want to sign great football players around the world, there's still talent in the academy and players need to be given opportunities as well. And Manu's a great example. McTominay was a great example. If you give these guys a chance, you give them an opportunity, they've proven that at this level, they are more than capable of succeeding. So again, as much as, and it'd be difficult because I don't think, again, you look at the summer, the World Cup, it'll be a tight summer for Carrick. And it's not always going to be possible to sign every player or every target you want, or maybe get rid of players you want to get rid of. So if that's going to be the case, you have to really look at the academy and try to integrate that again. Of course, for you to play in the first team, you've got to be, you've got to be good enough to do that. I know the Fletcher twins had opportunities as well. But Lacey as well had an opportunity. So there's been little spells of that, but I think the club have really got to kind of find their identity again and try and give young players a chance because as much as you're signing all these players around the world, there might be superstars at your doorstep that maybe you've overlooked. So I think that's definitely something that Carrick has to also take into consideration, when he becomes the permanent head coach. But yeah, guys, that was, a quick, sort of overview of the things that I think Carrick has to fix when he becomes permanent head coach of Man United. What do you guys think? Let me know your comments down below. Again, we're on TikTok now. Don't forget, we're also on X, on Instagram. The handles to those channels will be in the description down below. Please do like on YouTube and subscribe if you've not done so already. The likes really help, guys. So please continue to do that. We appreciate your support massively. But listen, guys, as always, thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next episode.